work from anywhere world, legacy appliance-based solutions no longer work. The proliferation of cloud-based applications, remote users, and personal devices are breaking down the old castle and moat model, requiring an entirely new approach to connecting and securing your organization. That's why we built Cloudflare One, a zero-trust network-as-a-service offering that provides cloud-based security, performance, reliability, and merges networking and security services in one comprehensive SASE solution. Cloudflare One draws on the global reach of Cloudflare's network to provide fast and reliable internet connections no matter where your employees work. We apply zero-trust security to every access request, authenticating all traffic, protecting your employees and data from threats, and preventing unwanted access and data loss. Plus, it works with your existing infrastructure and can all be controlled through one simple unified interface. You get a solution that's easy to use and works for your organization no matter where you are on your digital transformation journey. The end result? A fast, secure, reliable, and seamless experience.
Hey everyone, hi, good morning, good afternoon. We're gonna wait just a little bit more. So let me gonna play the video once again. We are just waiting for a bit more people and then we're gonna start right after that.
In our work from anywhere world, legacy appliance-based solutions no longer work. The proliferation of cloud-based applications, remote users, and personal devices are breaking down the old castle and moat model, requiring an entirely new approach to connecting and securing your organization. That's why we built Cloudflare One, a zero-trust network-as-a-service offering that provides cloud-based security, performance, reliability, and merges networking and security services in one comprehensive SASE solution. Cloudflare One draws on the global reach of Cloudflare's network to provide fast and reliable internet connections no matter where your employees work. We apply zero-trust security to every access request, authenticating all traffic, protecting your employees and data from threats, and preventing unwanted access and data loss. Plus, it works with your existing infrastructure and can all be controlled through one simple unified interface. You get a solution that's easy to use and works for your organization no matter where you are on your digital transformation journey. The end result? A fast, secure, reliable, and seamless experience.
Hey everyone, hello. Thank you for joining us. Might be morning, lunchtime, or afternoon already for you, but thanks for taking a bit of your busy day to talk about Cloudflare and talk about today specifically the developer experience. So we have in the call today Roland and myself. So Roland is a solution architect for APJC in Cloudflare. Hi Roland. And my name is Jeremy. I'm a security specialist looking after SASE as well. I think today what we're going to do is go through some of the use cases, tell you a bit about our solutions, how really we can help the developers and help you to help your own developers to have a much better experience when they are basically working, doing their day-to-day job. And we're going to do also a bit of demo. So you're going to see a bit of the interface. It won't be only about us talking and show you some slides. So with that, let's start. The first thing I want to say is a bit of housekeeping tip. You might have a lot of questions. I hope you will have questions. There's a dedicated Q&A function in the platform. Please use that, ask your question. We're going to answer some of them along the way, and we're going to keep around 5 to 10 minutes at the end of the webinar to answer some of them as well. So please go ahead, ask us the question, and we're going to reply. So a bit of context for today. I want you to look at this guy, and I want you to feel how peaceful he is. And we want you to be that person. We want you as an IT manager, as a security manager, anyone that has to manage some infrastructure, remote access. We want you to be as peaceful and happy as this person. And how do you achieve that? Most of the time, when you find the right balance between user experience, flexibility, security, and that's the whole thing. You are supposed to be the one that helps your HR, helps your talent organization to get the best people out there to come and work for your company. You need to help your IT team to maintain the existing infrastructure, make sure that they have access to the best tool. So there's a lot of complication, a lot of challenges around that. But at the end of the day, you are in the best place to help them. And today we said we're going to talk a bit more about developers. Why are we going to talk a bit more about them? Because they are a specific type of employees. These developers, most of the time, represent a very high risk. They represent a high risk to the company because they need to access sensitive data, sensitive applications, and most of the time they have elevated privileges because developers need to commit some codes, needs to run code in the production, and that requires elevated privileges. Elevated privileges means that if an attacker wants to take over your infrastructure, it's a very good point of entry, right? Because straight away, they will get permissions to do things like read-write on some applications, and that helps them in their attacks. So they are a very targeted population inside of your total employees, I would say. The second thing why developers are another specific type of employees is that they need to be extremely productive. Okay, especially if you are in the SaaS business, if you are in the software development business, your developers are in direct correlation to your go-to-market, your sales revenue. You need to ship features, you need to ship them fast. So if you want to maintain that productivity, you need to have tools and systems that can help them to do that. You don't want to be in the middle of them accessing their development environment or pushing code to production. And you also don't want them to lose time. Developers are usually pro users. They know a lot of shortcuts. They are very fast on what they do. So you want to preserve that environment and that productivity. Okay, so that's the second reason. The third reason is that when you think about being a developer, you usually use way more programs or tools or executables than a traditional user. Think about the different types of work the developer has to go through. If they want to deploy, if they want to orchestrate some infrastructure, they might be using things like Docker or Kubernetes. They also need to track issues. Maybe some bugs, maybe it's just the way they want to build that workflow, and they need to talk to other teams to make sure that things are integrated well together. So most of the times you hear things like Jira, for example. There's also a lot of API development, API integration. Things like Postman, we hear a lot. People are using this to do API testing. and so on and so forth. You hear about Grafana for visualization, you hear about Slack for communication between teams. So that gives you a huge array of tools that you need to manage, and you need to ensure that they have the right access level. And of course, as usual, with the best user experience as possible. And how we used to do that traditionally, I will explain a bit about Cloudflare after, but most of the organization today are using a VPN or maybe a VDI infrastructure. So VPN is really the traditional client that you launch. You connect to the remote network inside of your infrastructure, wherever you are, if you're working from home, for example, or if you're working from a cafe. And then you can access your applications because you almost belong to the network. But that has some challenges, of course. We realize with time that be part of that subnet can be problematic. Again, if you have an attacker coming in, they might be able to scan the network and decide that, oh, okay, maybe there's some interesting servers around there, and they try to go and what we call perform a lateral movement to try to have access to these different applications. So VPN has clearly some security gaps. It's also not the most user-friendly solution. Okay, you have to always think about turning it on, turning it off when you want to access internet, so you don't backchannel all the traffic inside your corporate network. So yeah, that's basically VPN. And then you have VDI. So VDI was something that was also very interesting because people were thinking, oh, we can solve all the problems of having remote access with protection of data, because the data will not be on my laptop, it will still be inside of my network, and I will just show a window, and people can work based on that. But today, 2023, working in a window, inside a window, the user experience is horrible. People don't want to work like that anymore. And it's also extremely costly because the storage, the compute, all these things you have to take care inside your own network. So these solutions are definitely things that are getting replaced more and more. And of course, it can be a huge project. It can take time. So the idea is really to start where you can have quick wins, where it makes sense for your business to offload this application to a new solution. And if you think about Cloudflare, I was saying I will talk a bit about Cloudflare. Cloudflare was exactly in that situation a few years ago. We were facing the same problem with VPN. We didn't have VDI at that time, but VPN was definitely the solution we were using across the company. And we had issue, and we thought about, okay, what can we do to solve that challenge? What can we do to make our employees, our developer, have a much better user experience while keeping all that security? And that's where we started working on a set of products. And everything started with what we call Access. Access is our zero trust network access solution. And we built that from scratch to replace our VPN. Of course, after that, we continue to leverage on our existing network to create more and more solutions. We have now things around secure web gateway, browser isolation, even email security. We have integration with identity providers. We have our own device clients. But today, we're not going to talk about all of this. We just want to focus on access because, as I said, we are looking for quick wins. We are looking for things that can really change how you operate and how you help your employees and your developers working more efficiently. So what's access? What do we mean by access? So access, usually the easiest way to represent this is to think about Cloudflare being a third-party, secure third-party in the middle of your user and your resources, like a broker. And what that broker will do is make sure that you have connectivity, and connectivity needs to be as efficient as possible between your user and your resources, your application. And once you have that connected, that we establish via a different mean, what we call an on-ramp or an off-ramp. So it's usually a tunnel, or we are using a client, or we can use a clientless access straight away via a web browser. We use this and we're gonna do security checks, okay? So that broker has two reasons. One is, of course, establishing the network connectivity, but the other one is to look at security. So what kind of security we're gonna look at? We're gonna integrate with your IDP to make sure that we have an identity, okay? That's the basis of zero trust access. You wanna know who is the user that is connecting to that application. And we can also do additional stuff. We can verify the device posture. We can look at conditional, specific policies around conditional access. So a lot of things we're going to do in Cloudflare. And once we decide that based on the policy, you are allowed to access that application, we will connect you. Think about it as this application remains private. Even though you can access it from anywhere, this application remains private because we use this concept of Cloudflare tunnel. And if you live outside of the internet, like outside of this network on the internet, like a typical attacker would do, you won't see anything. You won't see that application because we are not opening ports. Everything is from the internal network back to Cloudflare. Okay, and then all the traffic subsequently will go through that tunnel, so it's totally secure. And that's how we make private application available to everyone. And I think the idea of ZTNA made by Cloudflare is really to move all the application to next generation, to a SaaS model. So we want to make that user experience feel like a SaaS application. Whatever you have at the back end, if it's a SaaS app, fine, it's already there. We just do a bit of integration to look at security, but the user experience is already there. But the problem is when you look at custom application, when you look at applications that are non-web, and you want Cloudflare to be that central point of connectivity and security, to feel like any application I need to access as a developer, as an employee, I just go to Cloudflare and it will connect me to my app. As easy as a SaaS, as secure as a SaaS. And we can work, as I said, with SaaS app, hosted app, we can work with internal IP addresses, we can work with host name. So all of this has been taken into account into the platform to make it as simple as possible. You think about an application, you go through Cloudflare, Cloudflare will connect you to it. And we deploy this with many existing clients, and we have strong recognition on how it totally transforms the way people are working today. A few things I want to add on, really specific to developer, because that's the topic today. We are heavily focusing on that use cases. Developer usually have to access an application via a command line. Okay, it might be to execute some specific script. It might be to launch a specific process. So SSH is very, very important to developers. And traditionally, SSH was used either via a terminal or via a specific application that you run on your laptop. And when you do this, it's very difficult to feel like a SaaS application. And it's also quite difficult to get the security level that you need to have in that elevated privilege. SSH is always considered as high level of risk because you have elevated privileges. So what we decided is, instead of doing this in a terminal or in a thick client, why don't we use a web browser to render an SSH terminal and apply the same security as we do for SaaS? And that's exactly what we did with what we call browser rendering. So there's a specific configuration you can do in Cloudflare, and Roland will help us to go through that in detail right after, where you can connect to a server or any console and render everything inside that browser. Okay, makes it super easy to connect. And on top of this, we can also look at logging. Logging is really important for compliance, making sure that if something happens, you have a way of going back in time and understand who performed that action and potentially remediate it if it caused a security incident. So how we do this, we have this audit SSH function. You can activate it on any SSH that you run into our browser. and it will log all the different commands that you run and put that into a specific file that you can download later on for, as I said, specific compliance or just normal review from your security team. It could be something that you do on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis. Everything is there. Okay, so the idea is really to log that and make it sure it's available for your team when they need it. The other features that I want to talk about quickly is what we call warp to warp. So warp is our user agent, is our client that we install on the device. That's the client that will help you to connect to Cloudflare and go through all that zero trust network access platform, or SASE platform if you want. But sometimes what you want to do is also connect directly from a device to another device, from a laptop to a laptop, from a laptop to a server. And some use cases we can highlight here could be, I need to take over for remote control a specific device. I'm in the IT support team. I need to implement a change on behalf of a user. I need to connect to that device. And because this remote control are usually working in a different manner, meaning the connectivity is usually established from the server to the laptop, it doesn't work very well with traditional ZTNA approach. And that's why having that mesh connectivity, warp-to-warp connectivity, makes it much, much easier. So you can use all your favorite tools for remote support via the Cloudflare network using the warp-to-warp connectivity. Okay, so that's a very, very good and very practical features that you can use when you are in an IT support team. With that, I hope that gives you a bit of background on why we want to focus on developer access and what types of tools we have in the Zero Trust and the Cloudflare One portfolio. And I will hand over to Roland now to go through a bit of the demo, look at the dashboard, look at we do the configuration, and I'll come back at the end of that session to wrap up that webinar. Roland, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Jeremy. Okay, guys, let's go and look a little bit on how we can actually set up and configure. No, hang on. SSH access, and how we actually, in general, configure access via Cloudflare One into a customer's infrastructure, or into the public cloud, or into SaaS applications. As a quick overview, the way I want to structure the run through is have a quick overview on how we implement identity or identity providers. Then I go a little bit into application access, and then I talk about developer-specific use cases, which is purely around SSH access. I will also mention RDP access, as this is often an ask as well, and go from there. Can everybody see my screen? Hello? Can you guys see my screen?
Hi, Roland. We can see your screen. You right now sharing your, yes, we can.
Yes. No okay. Sorry, guys. I need to be sure because I ran into a couple of problems yesterday. So when you go into the Cloudflare dashboard, let me quickly show you. You normally go in. You're in your home window, and I only have 2 zones as compared to a couple of other guys that have 6 or 7 or 8. I only have 2, and from my home, I can directly go into the Zero Trust overview. The screen. So I go here, I see my screen, and I see what was going on the last couple of days. Because it's my personal account, there is not a lot of traffic, as you can see. At a maximum, I had actually 2 sessions going, that was it. And from here, this is where everything happens in regards to Zero Trust access. Let me quickly start off with how we implement the the authentication providers. So when you go into settings, you see here, I have already configured a number of IDPs or identity providers for my environment. I'm using anything like I can get my hands on to validate access scenarios for customers. Some of the guys, they have more configured, doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, when it comes down to it, we support two general or generic protocols. One is SAML and one is OpenID Connect. Any of your identity providers, if they can talk SAML or OIDC, we are able to support them. And even if they are not listed here in the group of existing identity providers, if it supports SAML or OIDC, you can most likely add it, and it wouldn't be a problem. Obviously, for all these ones listed here, Cloudflare provides an outline in their documentation on how to integrate it. But if you're familiar with SAML and how the integration works, it should be pretty straightforward task. Now, quickly let me go around I will talk through my Azure ID integration here briefly. So what you set up, you give it obviously a name, you have an application ID. These are all details I extract from Azure ID from my portal, and you set it up. It's an entire copy paste exercise. And then you have to choose which Azure cloud you're connecting to. As you know, Azure Microsoft offers a US government cloud capability, which we fully support. However, we are residing here in Singapore, and I'm connecting to the default Azure cloud component. I also enabled SCIM, System for Cross-Domain Identity Management, which is actually a very nifty feature because it automatically synchronizes the groups you have configured into your Cloudflare portal, and it helps you. What the nice thing about SCIM is, it helps you to deprovision users very quickly, force users to re-authenticate if there is a user group change, if this is happening. Now, because I have an Azure ID a subscription which came with my M365 subscription, I can enable it, but I do not get the functionality in order to showcase that. Besides that, it is actually very easy to deploy. So the entire Azure ID implementation in Cloudflare took me maybe 15 minutes. As you can see here, it's also very nicely outlined on what you have to do on the Azure ID end. Cloudflare walks you step by step through the entire process on how to set this up. And this is the same no matter which identity provider you're using. If it is Okta, it is exactly the same. We provide a walkthrough and for the integration on how to set up your Okta account. Okay. Now let's go over to application access. Now, what we can do in application access is we can add several groups of different applications. So one, what you can see here, is self-hosted, SaaS, and private network. So let me briefly emphasize on the three highlighted windows here. So self-hosted is your typical application, HTTP application you publish out to the internet. And the way it works is that you set it up, and when you go in here into your self-hosted application, it will ask you for a domain name or for an application name. Let's call the application test new, and it will then ask you for a subdomain name. And because I already have two domains configured here, I configure it as under my roland.org one, and then I can go through and now, as soon as going through this. This is actually a CNAME record, which we are creating in the setup. The full DNS record will be created in Cloudflare, however, is not exposable to the internet. All this does is when the request is coming, new.roland.org, it will automatically redirect it through Cloudflare and cannot take another path. You can talk here about the application appearance. You can also configure a blog page. You can redirect the URL to a custom page you have created, or you can create a custom page template. And here, very important, you can whether accept all identity providers, but I normally always go with one because this is what people normally do. You can configure all of them. I normally go with Azure ID or I go with SAML, one of them. And you can say skip identity provider selection if only one is configured, which means when the user logs on, he will only see a single identity provider window. Now, if I highlight all of them, when the user logs on and authentication is required, the users will be prompted with all these identity providers. If he's set up with all of them under the same username, he can just choose one of them. And then you go next, and then that's where you set up your policy name. And let's say that's my test new policy, all right? It's an allow policy. I set up here my groups. So the administrators and the ASEAN user group is where all my Active Directory Azure AD users are, and then you create additional rules, right? So here you can go in and say, I only allow anybody into my environment which is using my Azure ID email address. That is the first choice I do, and I say as well, add require, and I require also that all the users have to come from Singapore, for example, right? So I say Singapore. That would mean the user has to log in with an email address which matches my subdomain plus Singapore as a country, right? I can also say I can do an external evaluation where I go ahead and I contact an external evaluation entity, and I have to obviously provide the keys, the key URL. It will pull that down, and Cloudflare Zero Trust solution will utilize the URL, the evaluation URL, to determine what to do with the user. So we will process it. I can define IP address ranges. I can define a common name. I can use certificates, service tokens, also very handy. So I can create service tokens for any type of access. Here I created one for SSH access some time ago. Service tokens are time limited. So they are normally, when you issue them, they are limited to a maximum of 1 year validity. You then have to renew them. You can do that within the Cloudflare Dash. I'll show you in a minute. And you can define the login methods. You can choose SAML groups or device posture, for example. I have a device posture configured here, which is my device serial number list. That means I'm checking for the serial number of the device which is logging on. If my device doesn't match the serial number, application launch will not be allowed. This is it in more or less. I can also, if my SCIM implementation would work properly, what you would see here is that all the Azure ID groups would be synchronized into my Cloudflare Zero Trust dashboard. And I could then say here, I can also create them differently. I could go into my Azure portal and copy the Azure ID group ID and paste it here. But normally with SCIM, it would automatically replicate them down. And you could choose, okay, only users of this group are allowed to access this application. This is how it on a high level how it looks like. You then go to the next, and there's an additional number of settings you can do. You can do cookie settings. You can do access control allow credentials, and very important here, as an additional setting, you can allow SSH rendering. You can allow rendering of an SSH session within a browser window. I'm going to show that separately later, after I went through the entire configuration setup. Now, this is actually should have happened first. Quickly, in regards to the Cloudflare tunnel, actually, this is how it is. It is very easy for developers to onboard a server residing in a public cloud to be accessible via Zero Trust. So what you do is here, you provide a name, sorry, typo, and you go here, and what it does is it gives you the install outline. So you're going to go here. For example, I work a lot with Ubuntu. You can download, you can copy the install, go into your VM instance, paste it in, run it under sudo, install it, and the Cloudflare tunnel will come up within a minute and a half. I promise you post install, it takes about 20 seconds for the tunnel to come up. It is that easy. It is. I think this is a really, really nice feature, and the way we have realized that on how to install that and onboard any users onto the Cloudflare infrastructure. Now, when I'm in tunnels, as you can see here, I haven't finished configuring it. Let me quickly delete that because I haven't installed this tunnel anywhere, so it will be listed as an inactive tunnel. When I'm looking here at my tunnels, I can go in. So, for example, in this tunnel, and what I'll do, the tunnel configuration has two components. I have to configure the public hostname of applications I want to be accessible via the Cloudflare tunnel. What that does is that the Cloudflare tunnel will allow any traffic through the Cloudflare tunnel for ssh2.rolandr.org. So what happens there? There is obviously a lookup happening. The Cloudflare tunnel will process it, and then will provide access to the backend application. Here with private networks, that is also a very important configuration step. When you have the Cloudflare WARP client installed on your device, what you can do is you can provide private IP address access into your infrastructure. That would mean if the Cloudflare tunnel sits on your server, then obviously you have access to the private IP address of the server as long as you configure it here. This is the first step you have to do in order to achieve access. There's a second step which I will go into a little bit later, but this is the main one, because if you configure private IP address access, say for example for network access here, sorry, I didn't finish that actually. I didn't finish that here on the self-hosted. If you configure private network access, for example, and you're going to go in and you select private network access, or you say here private network, and you provide access to an IP address 10.5.6.7. If you do not make this IP address accessible in your tunnel configuration, it will not be accessible over your WARP client. Right? And this is very, very important to remember. So there is this configuration step for SSH access where you have to tell a Cloudflare, okay, I want to provide access to this IP. And as a next step, I will then create rules who and how this is accessible. So if it's, for example, if it's for SSH, you're going to go in and say destination port is 22, right? And you say destination IP 10.5.6.7, destination port 22. So that means you do not provide full access to 10.5.6.7. You limit it to 22. That's all you provide here. Anyone accessing via Cloudflare tunnel on this IP address, this is the only service or the only listener he can access. If he would go to anything else, if there's a listener on port 80 or 443, would not be accessible, would not be allowed, right? You could also check for device posture or identity. This is more like for SAML attributes, user group emails, or the device posture, as I mentioned before. If I want to access it, I could, say, for example, check for my macOS version, right? And say, hey, do I meet the macOS version check? Yes, no, otherwise access is not allowed. This would be the configuration around network access for the infrastructure. Enable application in App Launcher just means we have an App Launcher, we have a small web portal which we can make accessible. And if we're going to tick this box, the user will be able to get access to it and launch an application directly for SSH access. To finish off, we can also publish SaaS applications in Cloudflare. And the way it works is Cloudflare can act as an identity provider or as a service provider to a SaaS application, depending on what the customer, how the customer wants to set up access into the backend SaaS application. It is pretty straightforward on the Cloudflare end, how to configure a SaaS application. I quickly showcase. I think I have a developer account for Salesforce. I set that up here. It is actually the same way how you set up the any other application. The big configuration steps are done within the SaaS application provider, because depending if you are using Cloudflare as your IDP, obviously you have to configure your identity. You have your SaaS application provider to loop back all the authentication requests into Cloudflare, or if you want Cloudflare to be the service provider only, and then the Salesforce would, for example, maybe use Azure AD as their identity provider, whatever the customer has set up. We don't mind. We support both integration solutions, and the user would then get prompted. Obviously, if it's integrated with Cloudflare, we provide single sign-on. That would mean the user has authenticated already via the WARP client, and when he launches the application, the access into the application is passed through, the credentials are provided, and the user has access into his SaaS application. If we act as a service provider, the user has to re-authenticate, obviously, again. Quickly around the around applications, I think we are done. Quickly, what I wanted to show here as well is access to an application I have configured, which is sorry, there's a typo. I hope it is up and running, because there were a number of issues. As you can see here, this is one of the applications. It's actually a developer application, but it's actually at least shows some graphics. So we use that internally to set up application firewall policies. This is one of the applications I have configured here in my environment, and I provide clientless as well as client access to it. The main thing here around access into applications, and that is very important, is that if it is clientless, so we do not have a client component installed, we still support that. And if we're going to go into the application configuration here again, so let's say we're going to go here into HTTP bin, I have the capability to go in and redirect the application into a isolated browser window, isolate application. So here, so that would mean I can then say upon the users trying to access the application, I can say anyone who is accessing the application will access the application in an isolated a browser isolated window. So what does that mean? Cloudflare instantiates a remote browser session itself, and then what it does, the remote browser session sends vector rendering commands down to the local browser where we redraw the contents of the web page. I quickly want to say we are using in Cloudflare, all 3,200 employees are configured for RBI. That means any external website we are accessing, or majority of it, will get rendered in an RBI session. And it's an extremely performant solution, so it is actually usable on a very large scale, and also would be accessible in, you can also use an isolated application when you render an SSH session within an RBI session as well. That is supported. You can also do things like temporary authentication, where we ask users to get temporary authentication. That would mean the email is then getting kicked off to one of the approvers, or we can give them a purpose justification where they have to provide a purpose justification, and we then can provide them manual access into the infrastructure. Quickly on the tokens. So here you can see my service token that I have created for SSH. So this service token can be used for authentication-less access into the infrastructure. We can also provide mutual TLS, so where we then provide a client certificate, and there will be a mutual SSL handshake in between the client and Cloudflare to access the session. And then here is the setup for short-lived certificates. So this is something as well which we provide. We give the customer the capability to use short-lived certificates in their browser rendered SSH sessions. There's a little bit of a setup behind that. It's not too difficult. It's actually quite nicely outlined in our documentation. You can follow that through. Finally, I wanted to quickly talk about the capability of us, and because Jeremy touched on it, we can actually do SSH auditing. I have an SSH auditing policy, which I set up here for some of my, for one of my backend SSH sessions to a server. So here I configure a destination IP address. I can say whether private or public IP address, so I do it on an OR. And then I can do a selection here where I say audit SSH. The main thing here is when I set up the policy settings is that I can also enable SSH command logging. What happens is that then Cloudflare uses an SSH instance, an open SSH instance, where it proxies all the configuration through. So you have to go ahead and install a public root certificate, or a public key onto Cloudflare to authenticate to it. We do not see the commands at all. All we're going to do is we store them, and then upon requirement, you can download them and decrypt them with your own private key. So the way this looks like is when you go into Gateway and you go into Network, SSH here, and I can go, sorry. And what that shows you is, that's a little bit sensitive. I'm sorry. It comes up. It sometimes needs 2 or 3 refreshes in order to show up all the policies. I can promise you there is a number of them in there. And then there's a download button. Here we go. So you can see here, all the SSH policies have been logged. Here, all my access attempts here. You download it, and then obviously there's an outline in our documentation on how to decrypt the file with your private key so that you have full access to it. We can also do log push, where we allow you to forward all the logs into a CM server in your environment. That's also configurable. Very straightforward in the deployment. No big issues there. And finally, I want to show you guys how a rendered SSH session looks like. Here we go. So this is on one of my servers. I can quickly show you. So this is so where I can go in, I can do my work, I can do any work from my browser rendered session. It is very, very easy and nice to handle. It allows you even to do that from your mobile phone or your tablet or from wherever you want to access it. All you need to do is you need to be able to download the public keys or the public keys onto your device, so that the device accessing the tunnel will present them to the backend SSH server. So that would conclude my presentation on how we're going to use SSH into the infrastructure. I promised I'd quickly talk about RDP. So with RDP access, because I know some developers also require RDP access, there's actually 2 ways. Actually 3 ways. There is the way Microsoft allows you to go via a viewer to set it up and access an RDP server. I have seen people integrating that within Cloudflare. You can also set up a guacamole environment and access it via guacamole. We integrate with that very, very nicely. Or you use the Warp client. You configure access into the infrastructure via the Warp client, and you configure, like you provide network access. The way I outlined it before, you go into your access configuration. You configure network access here into a private network, and all you're going to do is destination IP 1.2.3.4, and then you go into the next window, and application name is required, and provide the respective network access, where you then tell the tunnel, select destination port is 3389 here in this case, and then I can access the server 1.2.3.4 on the private IP address on port 3389.
Thanks, Roland. Thanks a lot. I'm just mindful of the time because we have only 5 minutes left.
Sorry. Yes, sorry. You go ahead.
So I just wanted to go through some of the questions that were asked. There was one question as can we have multiple tunnel connector on one side? If yes, does it process the traffic? So the answer is yes, we can do that.
Yes.
We have this concept of replica. So you can use a replica to have failover and high availability on your application side. So you can definitely do that. There's a specific Cloudflare DevDoc document. So I can put the answer here. So let me just share with everyone. Okay, so there's a specific article about that. You can go and read about it. Definitely something that is supported. There's another question on, does Cloudflare ZT integrated with third-party MDM to get telemetry on a device posture? Yes, we do that. We have a supported list. It could be Intune, it could be Jamf. We also integrate with endpoint protection solutions, things like CrowdStrike, for example. So we can definitely get device posture around there. Does Cloudflare Zero Trust support file transfer over SSH on browser?
No.
That's something, Roland, do you have the answer to this one?
Yes,
File transfer
no,
over SSH? Okay.
No, we don't. No.
So that's something that we are still working on. What SIEM does Cloudflare login features support? There's also in Cloudflare documentation, a few of them, Sumo Logic, Splunk, but basically anything that is S3 compatible, you can push the logs into a bucket and you can use your SIEM to read from that bucket. So we can integrate with most of the SIEM out there. Another question about database connectivity. Developer might also want to connect to database. Is there something you wanna add on this one, Roland?
Yeah, so database connectivity the requirement would be the WAP client, and you then can configure a network policy providing access to your database. So let's say you have a client on your device, then obviously it makes a connection request to the database. In order for that to happen, the WAP client is a must. There's also a question, can we have multiple tunnel connections on one site? Yes, you can. You can create tunnel replicas, and then Cloudflare will load balance the traffic across the replica tunnels. Right, so understand that, right? So there is obviously, if it's on a single server, there is a limit where the server hits a limit in order of processing traffic. You can also create tunnel replicas with the same tunnel ID across different instances, if that is required.
Okay, there's another question about how it works with AD on-prem. So we can definitely integrate with AD on-prem as long as we have an ADFS server, because we need to talk SAML, so we need to have a federation server to do that. But as long as we have this, no problem to use AD on-prem as well. There's, I think we have time for one more question. I have been using the WARP client based on email address, but I would like to control what device people connect from. Can we use certificate? I would like to push a certificate, and in that way, I can stay in control of what device staff use. Yes. So that's what we were explaining about device posture. So Roland was going through some of the configuration there. There's definitely things you can do around device posture to check not only the identity, but also what device people are using. It could be a certificate, it could be part of a domain, it could be a specific file, many different things you can do that. Everything is under the device posture, and we're gonna just share with you the article from the Cloudflare dev docs around that, so you can have a look at all of this. And with that, I think, let me just find the link and share it here. Okay, that's the one. Let me just answer this. Okay, I just shared the link so you can have a look at that. Just to wrap up the session, and thanks a lot, Roland, for all the nice demo and the dashboard. I hope everyone got a understanding of what's the benefit of using Cloudflare for all this access, and especially for the developer access. The idea is really to have the best user experience as possible. Let's not think about VPN on and off, Windows in Windows, like VDI type of solution. Something very simple, work as a SaaS model, simplify your admin, your day-to-day work, makes you more agile. That's very important. Go along with the business, be an enabler. And at the end of the day, make sure that everyone is secured. I just want to end this webinar to just give you a small tease for the next one. We just introduced something called Cloudflare One for data protection, talking about everything we do around data. Everyone knows that data is so important, especially when we talk about developer. Code is the most important value in the organization these days. And of course, you heard about everything related to AI, ChatGPT, and all this. There's a lot of question about how we manage that risk. We're going to talk about that. Keep looking for additional webinar. We're going to put that onto LinkedIn and everywhere. Follow us, and next time we're going to go a little bit more into that data protection topic. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today, and have a great rest of the day. See you in the next webinar. Thank you so much.